Good morning, everyone. On behalf of our local Pax Christi, Washington, DC, Baltimore group, I'd like to welcome everyone, extend a warm welcome to everyone. Special shout out to Sister Ronnie Schwein, who's coming to us from New York State. So between Ronnie, yourselves, and me in Dubuque, Iowa, we're extending across a great number of miles. So our influence in this Zoom chat room is great. So again, welcome to everyone. This is our first online assembly for the local Pax Christi group. So we're on a bit of a learning curve. So like I said, this is the first. And so, I mean, of course, the preference is always to meet face to face. It seems to be easier to build relationships when we could meet each other face to face. But given the circumstances, we will take full advantage of all the opportunities that we have that we're able to share online as well. So this will be a time for us to talk a little bit about, from a couple of the local members, to talk about our drone witness, as well as our anti-nuclear stance, and also a time to hear from the Pax Christi USA director, Johnny Zakovich. Be a time for him to talk about some of the issues that we currently face and how we can look at that from the stance of nonviolence. As many of you already know, the local group, our local Pax Christi Metro DC Baltimore group, is a region of Pax Christi USA, and also a national section of Pax Christi International. Our values are rooted in the gospel. We're rooted in Catholic social teaching, as well as gospel nonviolence. We affirm the sacredness of human life in the dignity of every human person. So we do all of our work based on those values. I'm going to turn it over now to Dennis, who will talk a little bit about the details of our assembly today.
Good morning. I will explain a few issues about the presentations you will hear this morning. As Brian mentioned, this is our first event which we've done online, so I hope you will forgive us if there are some unexpected glitches that appear. On the screen should be the agenda for the spring assembly. As stated, the event is 2 hours in duration, ending at 12 noon. The agenda on your screen shows the sessions in this event. We are currently in the opening session. In a few minutes, we will begin the session on armed drones and nuclear weapons, which will be 20 minutes in length. Then move to a review of the key issues facing Pax Christi, which will be a full hour, and it features our main speaker, Johnny Zakovich, the Executive Director of Pax Christi USA. This main session will be followed by a final session on the future of Pax Christi Metro DC Baltimore, which is our regional area here. It will be 20 minutes also. Each of these 3 sessions will consist of a presentation followed by Q&A. Because of the large number of participants, there will be no verbal questions in these sessions, but participants are welcome to put their questions or comments into the chat box, where they will be read out by our moderator, Kurt Hansen. In the chat box, you can decide if you want to send your question to a specific speaker or to be read by all participants. The icon to open the chat box is on the bottom of your screen when the Zoom screen comes back. along with the icons for activating your video screen, muting your audio, and viewing the number of participants. I encourage you to find these icons on your Zoom screen now so you know where they are later in the presentations. You can find them on your Zoom screen at the very bottom when you drag your cursor downwards. As noted earlier, Kurt will moderate each session and read out and pass questions from the chat box to the appropriate speakers. At this point, I would like to turn over the floor to Luann Mostello, who will lead us in a short reflection. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, and welcome everyone. Reflecting on the events of the last several weeks, the many marches, speeches, vigils, and protests, I recalled a special happening in July of 2019. It was the concert, a celebration of community and song sponsored by Pax Christi USA and Pax Christi International that was held in Silver Spring, Maryland. Valimar Jensen, an Afro-American singer-songwriter, was one of the three headliners. She sang an adapted version of the traditional spiritual Walk Together Children. Because there have been many technical difficulties with Zoom in terms of music, I'm unable to share this tune with you or even sing it with you this morning, but I will remind you of the main words of its refrain. Walk together, children, don't get weary. We will walk for justice in this great land. We will walk and never tire. We will walk for justice in this great land. These are simple yet powerful words, but Valimar added an important timeless message by Saint Oscar Romero in her spoken musical bridge. Bishop Romero reminds us, the church's place is by the side of the poor, of the outraged, of the rejected. This is the mission entrusted to the church, a hard mission to uproot sins from history, to uproot sins from the political order, to uproot sins from the economy, to uproot sins from wherever they are. I find that it is often in song that the essence of our ideas and commitment is expressed. And since we are the church, we have that difficult mission before us. However, the gospel for this weekend, in celebrating the solemnity of the most holy body and blood of Christ, gives us these words of Jesus to remember. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me and I in him. This presence of Jesus in us brings with it the strength to be his agents in this world. A poem commonly attributed to Saint Teresa of Avila is an inspiration for me. Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks compassion on this world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. Yours are the hands, yours are the feet, yours are the eyes. You are his body. Christ has no body now on earth but yours. So let us now start with prayer. Bob Moore will display the words on the screen so you can say them with me. The text is adapted from a prayer service created by the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. Good and gracious God, you invite us to recognize and reverence your divine image and likeness in our neighbor. Enable us to see the reality of racism and free us to challenge and uproot it from our society. our world, and ourselves. We beg for both forgiveness and conversion as we open our hearts and minds in communal prayer. O Lord, help us to examine our own biases and positions of privilege through self-reflection and earnestly work to resolve them. Help us to live by compassion and be consciously inclusive of all individuals. Help us to affirm the value of diversity. Help us to promote understanding, inclusion, and mutual respect, and thus build community within all races, ethnicities, and cultures. Help us to transform our institutions into authentically anti-racist and anti-oppressive communities of action. Help us to advocate for justice, demand equal opportunity for all, and so help create a beloved community for everyone to share. Good and gracious God, who loves and delights in all people, we stand in awe before you, knowing that the spark of life within each person on earth is a spark of your divine life. Differences among cultures and races are multicolored manifestations of your light. May our hearts and minds be open to celebrate similarities and differences among our sisters and brothers. We place our hopes for racial harmony in our committed action and in your presence in our neighbor. May all people live in peace. Amen. And I'll turn over the meeting now to Kurt Hansen.
Okay, hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Kurt Hansen. I'm a member of the Council of the Pax Christi Metro DC in Baltimore. One comment, I'll be reading off your questions to the speakers so that they can answer. But one change to what Dennis said, you can either post your questions in the chat to everyone or to me, not to the speaker, because if you post it to the speaker, I won't be able to see them. So either post your questions to everyone or to me. So, and without further ado, our next session will be on armed drones and nuclear weapons, presented by Bob Moore and Jack McHale. Bob is the coordinator of the Pax Christi group at St. John von Neumann Church in Reston, Virginia, and Jack is the coordinator of the Pax Christi group at Our Lady Queen of Peace Church in Arlington, Virginia. Both are current members and past chairpersons of the Pax Christi Metro DC Baltimore Regional Council. To you guys.
Sure. Here we go. So hi everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm going to run through this slide presentation fairly quickly. Then Jack will add additional comments, and then we'll have a few minutes for question and answers. So our region's involvement in the issue of nuclear weapons goes back to the very beginning of Pax Christi Metro DC, well before my time. As one example, the group participated in the 1985 Ribbon Project promoting nuclear disarmament. And you'll hear about the 2020 version of that at the end of our program. Our involvement in the issue of drone warfare goes back to at least 2010. And then in November 2012, thanks to Jack's leadership, we began regularly scheduled protests against drone killing that continued through February of this year when we had to suspend them due to the COVID-19. And starting in June 2018, we teamed up with Consistent Life Network, Rehumanize International, and others for a quarterly demonstration at the White House in favor of nuclear weapons abolition. Those have also been suspended due to COVID-19. Normally, neither drone killing nor nuclear weapons attract much public attention. In the last 9 months, though, there have been a handful of relevant events that have generated some news coverage. Last September, at least a few media sources took notice when a U.S. drone strike mistakenly targeted a large group of nut farmers and laborers in Afghanistan, killing 30 and injuring 40. Of course, in January, everybody noticed when the U.S. brazenly assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in a drone strike in Baghdad, bringing the U.S. to the brink of war with Iran. Last month, the Trump administration continued its withdrawal from international agreements to limit nuclear weapons, including the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019, and now the Treaty on Open Skies. And so far, the administration is refusing to extend the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which is due to expire in February. Also last month, senior administration officials discussed conducting a nuclear test explosion, ending a decades-long moratorium on such testing. The photo on the left is from the last underground nuclear test the U.S. conducted in 1992. And then just this month, the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol flew an unarmed Predator drone over Minneapolis to spy on the protesters over the killing of George Floyd. So let's look at some of the moral objections to drone killing and nuclear weapons, first considered separately and then together. Some of the main moral objections to drone killing are covered in this excerpt from the short film, The Religious Community and Drone Warfare, produced by the Interfaith Network on Drone Warfare. So I'm going to show about a 5-minute clip that includes remarks from Steve Kolecki and Ginny Ferris, both with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Steve is now retired, but Ginny is still there. And also Dr. Susan Thistlethwaite from the Chicago Theological Seminary.
If you have to, as a last resort, use a drone technology, what's the probability of success? And using drones outside of war zones, where you have whole civilian populations that have been terrorized by the use of drones, going after signature strikes or something on terror targets and so forth, actually could be quite counterproductive. It could raise up the very extremism that the strikes are meant to tap down. So you got to ask bigger questions. It's not just a question of technology. There are moral questions to be asked regarding the use of drones.
Now, signature strikes mean that there is a pattern of activity that is identified as potentially dangerous. There's no particular individual. And remember, these are not people who have been convicted of any crime. They have not been tried in any court, but there are activities that are identified by a computer program, and the individuals engaging in that suspect activity are fired upon by the drone. These are very controversial, and I would argue completely immoral, uses of force.
Most egregiously, some people are targeted simply because of where they are and how old they are. In areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan, any male between the ages of 20 and 40 who are found in certain areas and who are killed by a drone strike are automatically labeled combatants. I think in one case there was a cleric who was trying to educate an extremist on how his actions were against the tenets of Islam. Nonetheless, these people were killed.
Part of the difficulty with drones is they're very inexpensive, and you place none of your own combat troops at risk in the use of drones. And so there's a fear, will the use of drones become a first resort rather than a last resort to resolve a conflict or to get at the use of drones? The church has very serious questions about the moral questions about the use of drones outside zones of active conflict, active war. Civilians in rural village somewhere in the world who are not at war should not expect to be collateral damage in a drone strike. We need to erect some legal barriers to the deployment of drones. Otherwise, it'll be sort of like the Wild West in terms of the nations of the world deploying drones. You know, how would we feel if drones get deployed against, armed drones get deployed against, you know, our people and our interests around the world? You know, and we're not far away from that. There are a lot of nations that are deploying drones for all kinds of purposes, and we need to be sure that there's a strong international framework governing the use of drones so that it doesn't become the Wild West, it doesn't spiral out of control.
The technology is a temptation to see there can be a simple, easy, and cheap way to police our communities or to police the world. That's a fantasy. That's a myth. What these technologies, and we've had them now for quite a while, what they cause is blowback. What they cause is increased terrorism. What they cause is a breakdown in community relations. They break down civil rights. And finally, they do not solve problems. They are themselves part of the problem.
Okay, so a number of the following points were covered in the film. First, that drones are relatively easy to use since they don't put U.S. forces at risk from being shot at. Even when an alleged terrorist could be captured, it may be much easier to kill him with a missile from a drone, turning lethal force from a last resort to a simple matter of convenience. The Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations have cited the 2001 and 2002 authorizations for the use of military force as legal justification for actions that have nothing to do with these congressional resolutions, like our use of armed drones in Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and Libya, and the January killing of General Soleimani. Civilians are often killed as collateral damage. One study found that over a 12-year period, the U.S. killed 28 unknown people for every intended target. There have been numerous mistakes, like wedding parties and the 30 pine nut farmers killed last fall. And as the film discussed, we frequently use signature strikes to kill unknown individuals that we think are up to no good. Drone strikes are counterproductive, causing blowback, as the film discussed. And the lack of transparency and accountability is a huge problem. Many drone strikes are not reported. The criteria for targeting people and the evidence that someone fit those criteria are not disclosed. The number of civilians killed or injured in drone strikes are grossly underreported by the military. No one is held accountable for civilian deaths. And the families of civilian victims rarely receive any explanation, apology, or compensation for their loved ones' deaths. Turning to nuclear weapons, the moral objections to their actual use are well known, given the devastating and indiscriminate impact they would have. Thanks to Pope Francis and the 2017 passage of the UN Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty, at least some greater public attention has been given to the moral objections to even the possession of nuclear weapons. And popes going back to St. John the 23rd have decried the expenditure of vast sums of money on arms, money that is urgently needed to meet basic human needs and to fund development. Here's Pope Francis making these points forcefully last November. Any use of nuclear weapons, he said, is, quote, a crime not only against the dignity of human beings, but against any possible future for our common home, unquote. Such use, quote, is immoral, just as the possessing of nuclear weapons is immoral. And in a world where millions of children and families live in inhumane conditions, the money that is squandered and the fortunes made through the manufacture, upgrading, maintenance, and sale of ever more destructive weapons are an affront crying out to heaven. Last February, we ran a full-page ad in the National Catholic Reporter with this image and text on the top, and the names of 214 individual and organizational signatories below, including many of you on this call. Armed drones and nuclear weapons have obvious differences, principally in the scale of destruction, but they also have much in common. Both are forms of remote killing. Drone operators can push a button and launch a strike from thousands of miles away. Nuclear weapons are the ultimate form of remote mass killing, especially when launched from land-based missiles or nuclear submarines. Both weapon systems produce blowback. Drone strikes often kill innocent people, creating anger and resentment. Malala conveyed this message to President Obama when she met with him in October 2013. And Faria al-Muslimi from Yemen said the same thing when he testified to a Senate committee in April 2013. Quote, "What radicals had previously failed to achieve in my village, one drone strike accomplished in an instant. There is now intense anger and growing hatred of America," unquote. Of course, a nuclear strike would do far worse in breeding anger and resentment worldwide, but it would also lead to a more literal form of blowback, as smoke and ash from even a limited nuclear exchange would circle the globe and have devastating effects on agriculture, including in the US. Both types of weapons are seen as inevitable, including further so-called advances in technology. The fact that something can be done quickly becomes an imperative to act before others do or keep up with what others are doing. The Pentagon is now testing swarming drones, fleets of small drones that could be launched from and recovered from transport planes. They're also reportedly working on autonomous weapon systems that would rely on artificial intelligence to make their own decisions on locating and targeting targets, destroying targets. Likewise, in the area of nuclear weapons, the Pentagon is planning to spend over $1.5 trillion over 30 years to so-called modernize its arsenal and delivery systems to include a low-yield tactical nuclear weapon and long-range standoff cruise missiles to be launched from planes. Both drones and nuclear weapons are destabilizing, lowering the threshold for war. We've already been using armed drones in places where we would never risk sending troops, and the new technologies will make things worse. Concerning the swarming drones, the chief engineer on the project for one of the defense contractors says that the lower cost of the small drones could, quote, "allow the company's military customers to take greater risks and be more aggressive on the battlefield," unquote, as if that were a good thing. Similarly, the move to smaller nuclear weapons is designed to make them more usable in battlefield situations, making an escalation from conventional to nuclear weapons more tempting in a crisis. And finally, both weapon systems have largely gotten a pass from the public. Aside from activists like the Kings Bay Plowshare 7 and folks like us, most people, at least in this country, give little thought to these weapon systems, or they may even consider them a good thing. So what can be done about these weapon systems? Push for full abolition, of course, but also take whatever interim practical steps we can. Congress is now considering the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act. Regarding drones, urge your representative and senators to end the CIA's use of armed drones, impose moral limits on the military's use of armed drones, and require full transparency and reporting. Regarding nuclear weapons, urge them to prohibit the use of funds to conduct a nuclear test and direct the president to extend New START. In addition, you can urge your representative and senators to support the 5 policy objectives of the Back from the Brink campaign, which we highlighted in our NCR ad, including canceling the wasteful nuclear weapons modernization program. Finally, you can participate in the 2020 ribbon event, which Bob Cook will talk about at the end of our program today. So Jack, let me turn it over to you for anything you may want to add before we get to the questions. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Bob, thank you. The silence that has come from our newspapers and media about the drone program is absolutely amazing. We used to hear about drone attacks on a regular basis. Now you hear nothing about drones because more and more people just, it's accepted. Just yesterday, our president has reinterpreted a Cold War era arms agreement that will allow U.S. manufacturers, specifically General Atomics and Northrop Grumman, to sell drones to nations such as Jordan, Saudi, Romania, United Arab Emirates, etc. Trump has said, and it's surprising. I watched the news last night, heard nothing about this. I got a note on this thing, but this is a major escalation of the drone program. Currently, we only sell drones to England, France, and Australia. This will open up the drone trade to essentially the world. It's being moved on because the U.S. government is saying this will help us fight terrorism and stop aggression before it gets to the U.S. if more countries have drones. So here's the big news. It's a $20 billion market, and it's a way for U.S. Defense manufacturers to increase their share of that market. So that, again, these are things that are going on. We're not even aware of it. You really have to search these things out. And one of the things that Pax Christi Metro DC has been doing, and I think it's important, besides speaking truth to power when we go to the White House or we go to the CIA, we've been spending a fair amount of time trying to educate people about drones and their growth, and why we have to stop the growth of this drone program. In front of the White House, we encounter many people, most people that we talk to in front of the White House that are visiting from out of the United States are very supportive of us. The people that are most negative to what we're doing are people from our country who say, and this is the misconception, they say, well, it's saving U.S. lives. We're not putting our boys in harm's way, and we're at Creech Air Force Base in Las Vegas or Hancock Air Force Base in upstate New York. So it's been incumbent upon what we've been doing, along with Rehumanize and Consistent Life, our partners that are out there with us, trying to educate a lot of people about drones. Just on nuclear weapons, just yesterday I was on another Zoom that Maryknoll, Office of Global Concerns, had put on. Dan Moriarty, one of our Pax Christi council members, Metro DC council members, was on. And he just reminded everybody that Trump has increased the nuclear budget by 20% for 2020. Likewise, he's decreased diplomatic resources by 22%. So we've increased our military or the nuclear budget by over 20%, and we've taken down by 22% money that goes to negotiate and build relationships and bridges with other countries. He spoke, and this is something that I think we won't be able to talk about today. We don't have too much time, but we do spend. I mean, Pope Francis has been very strong on anti-nuclear work and urging us to be active. And there's been a lot of things done by the U.S. Bishops' Conference, but we do not hear anything. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, from the pulpit. It does not. This whole notion of anti-nuclear does not translate to the pulpit, and it's not being said, even though our church is clearly against the spread of nuclear weapons and the use of nuclear weapons. So it's something perhaps we'll get some questions on about what we can do to get our church to be more involved and to be part of a consistent life ethic that is truly pro-life, against nuclear weapons, against drones, against abortion, against death penalty, and other things. So that's all I really want to say, Bob.
Great. Kurt?
Okay, yeah, we've got a few minutes for questions. So far we have one comment and one question. The comment is from Paul Magno. You want just to remind us that Kings Bay Plowshares face sentencing this summer. You saw a picture of them in Bob's presentation and of their protest. In particular, Liz McAllister, the first to be sentenced, received a time served due to her age, but others will all be facing prison sentences. So be sure to remember and provide your support. There's a question from Luann Mostello, and Jack or Bob, you can, either one of you can take this. Have you continued to see our brown and black brothers and sisters as more likely to accept the message about the dangers of armed drones than our white brothers and sisters?
So Jack, you want to cover that for when we're out there in the front of the White House?
Yeah, Luann, yeah, we do see more acceptance. I mean, they understand what it means for people that are living under oppression and the fear of drones versus, and the fear of police. I mean, there's a similarity to that type of thing that can happen anytime. We've had a couple conversations with people of color that speak of the fear that they must be going, the people living in countries such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, etc., that they live under constant fear. And the days they love the most are the days that you would think they would like. They love cloudy days because cloudy days create issues for drones to see them. Sunny days on days that they look forward to. And it's sort of, so there's a common thread in terms of fear and why they seem to be more supportive of it. We don't get that, and Bob, unless, I just haven't seen much support when we talk to people, and we do talk to scores of people when we're out there on a Saturday morning, saying, yeah, we really are supportive of it. Most people that are supportive of what we're trying to do out there and speaking truth to power are either people of color from the United States, or they are people from visiting the White House or visiting Washington, D.C., France and Australia and all is where we get our most good conversations with. We have a lot to do to educate people about the drone program.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Okay, it's almost time for our next talk. So I have two more comments I will read out. Comment from Luann, a quote from MLK. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on the progress of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Mm-hmm. And Mary Leopold also want to note that nuclear weapons, more about the nuclear weapons and environment. So I'll just note that. But now moving on to our next session, and we'll be facing on key issues facing Pax Christi, presented by Johnny Zakovich. Johnny has been the executive director of Pax Christi USA since last September. He's been working for Pax Christi at the national and international levels since 2001. So we welcome his comments today, and we thank him very much for spending his Saturday morning with us. Here's Johnny.
Thanks so much, Kurt. I'm really excited to be with you guys today and really wish I could be with you in DC. DC has been like a second home for me for a long time. But just to start off, I want to start by just offering y'all my thanks. It's, as Kurt mentioned, it's been almost 30 years since I first became involved with Pax Christi USA. Nearly 20 of those years since I first joined the national staff as a campus and a young adult organizer back in 2001. During that time, Washington, D.C. has been one of my many, many homes. I've stayed at some of the houses of people who are on this call. I've enjoyed many of y'all's hospitality and generosity on numerous occasions. And I'm especially thinking there of baseball games. I'm looking at you, Bob Cook. I've broken bread with you. I've gotten arrested with some of you. I've marched and protested and laughed and celebrated. And sometimes we've also grieved and mourned together. So being with y'all today is in many ways for me like being among family. So I wanted to start by just offering my gratitude for all the support and encouragement that you've given to me personally, but also for everything that you've done and given to Pax Christi USA to make us the prophetic and passionate presence that we are for the peace of Christ in the world today. So I'm really grateful to be with y'all this morning. If not actually physically and in person, we at least have Zoom. So I just wanted a quick note on process. I'm going to share a little bit about what I've been thinking about what the national office has been doing, and what I've heard from hundreds of conversations that I've been having with members all around the US since I started in this position. The interesting thing is that I had hoped to be on the road for much of this year, meeting people in their homes, sitting with you at your dinner tables, talking to local group meetings and regional gatherings. But with the pandemic, this is what we have now. So I'll share a little bit here, but I hope too that we can converse a little bit at the end. And I'm really thankful for Kurt's moderation, that he'll keep an eye on the questions and comments that people make in the chat box. And we'll get to those as I wrap up my presentation. We'll get to those questions and hopefully have a little bit of a conversation. But even if we're not able to get to something that you want to share or a question that you have today, I really want you to make sure that you reach out to me either by email or over the phone. I've talked to many of you in the months since I became the executive director, and I want to say that it's the insights and the experiences of people at the grassroots level that inform who I am and what it is that we are trying to cultivate for the vision of Pax Christi USA. So no matter the time we have today, after this is all said and done, I hope you'll reach out. I hope we'll have a chance to have some one-on-one conversations. And when we can physically meet again, I hope that we'll be able to sit down and have a drink or share a meal when I'm in DC. One of the things that just really struck me is what Luann started us off with today. And I just want to refer to that quote that she had. She quoted that the church's place is by the side of the poor, the outraged, and the oppressed. And I thought with everything that's going on in the world today and what we're seeing, particularly in our own country over these past few weeks, that that's a good place to start. With recent events in our nation, I know that I'm especially aware of the legacy of white supremacy, genocide, and colonialism that are part of my history and that poisoned the roots out of which grew this world that we live in. I come to you today as a white man, and I want to acknowledge that my views and my experiences have been shaped by the privilege that's accorded me because of my skin color. With everything that's going on in our country right now, much of what you in the nation's capital are experiencing and witnessing firsthand, I think it's important for me to name my perspective and to own my own racism and acknowledge how much work I, as a white person, have to do. And that begins for me by cultivating first a deep sense of humility, a recognition of all that I don't know, of all that I don't understand. And it includes cultivating a willingness to listen to and to learn from the Jesus who identifies himself as one of the hungry, as one of the sick, as the prisoner, the oppressed, as the ones who are being crucified. This Jesus is speaking to all of us today in our siblings of color and in the Black Lives Matter movement, both for our church and in the world. Too many times, for those of us here who are white, we could avoid the urgency of a Black child being killed by a police officer because that child didn't look like our son nor our daughter. Sometimes we've been like the vast majority of those people in the crowds in all of those biblical stories, interested enough to check in on things, to see what's happening, but too tied up in other things to leave our agendas or our pet projects or our important work and to pick up with Jesus and follow him on the way. For me, that's what I'm hearing right now in this moment. It's Jesus calling to us, clear as day, in all of those people that are crying out that Black Lives Matter. Again, when Luann started with that quote about the church's place being on the side of the outraged, I thought there's never been more appropriate words spoken about what we are called to as disciples of Jesus. So, even as we talk together here today, I don't want to forget that we're being given a rare opportunity to follow the biblical Jesus today in this movement that rose up because a Black man, George Floyd, was crucified by a white police officer. Because we need to see in that moment and the thousands of moments just like that one that happen to Black Americans every day in our country, we need to see there the crucified Christ. This is an important moment for our country, but it's also an important moment for Pax Christi USA. Most of y'all, as I look around and I see all the different faces on this conversation, you've been part of this movement for a long time. You know our history. You know that part of who we are, part of the seeds that grew into Pax Christi USA came out of the civil rights movement. Pax Christi USA doesn't come to the struggle for racial justice all of a sudden. Our recent history is rooted in a commitment that we made to embrace anti-racism and to examine and dismantle systemic racism in our society, but also within our own ranks too, in the organization, in the movement that is Pax Christi USA. And we made that commitment over 20 years ago now. Our work with Crossroads started in the mid-90s with anti-racism training for our national council and for key people in leadership. And it led to that commitment that we made in 1999, over a generation ago. The vision that came out of that discernment led us to state this, and I'm quoting from our vision statement. Pax Christi USA seeks to embrace this new identity, this identity of anti-racism, and to do all of our work from an anti-racist perspective, in the conviction that personal and systemic racism continues to perpetrate deep spiritual and social brokenness, and that it endangers all of creation. That's part of the vision statement of who we are and what we commit to as Pax Christi USA. And it's a commitment that we started a long time ago, not just coming to the table now in this moment, but one we've been wrestling with and struggling with and deepening our resolve to live out concretely for a long time. Some of y'all know that I've been part of the Catholic worker movement. I lived at a Catholic worker house for almost 15 years and I raised my children there. And during those years, I lived with and I worked alongside a lot of people who suffered from addiction. One of the fellas whom I got to know at the first Catholic worker community that I was ever part of was, and these are his words, an old-time, old-school alcoholic. His name was Gary. And Gary used to tell me that for the guys that were just starting to come to the conclusion that their addiction was a problem, for the guys that were just starting their recovery, they needed to realize that they didn't become an alcoholic overnight, and it wasn't going to magically go away overnight, that it was going to be a long haul. Like every organization in our country, Pax Christi USA was not exempt or immune to being shaped to serve the white supremacy that has rightly been called our nation's original sin. We might have made the commitment to doing this work to become anti-racist 21 years ago, but that journey has really only just begun. And we have been blessed to have people all along the way call us out of our sin and to accountability and to repentance. You know some of those people. My predecessor in this position, Sister Patty Chappelle, and her companion, her co-worker and partner, Sister Anne Louise Nadeau, and all the work that they have done with religious communities that are part of Pax Christi USA, with our membership in our local groups. We've had many iterations of the Pax Christi anti-racism team who have helped us to break open the conversation about what racism is and how power and privilege exercise dominion over our life despite our best intentions to live our discipleship to Jesus. And there have been so many others, especially people of color within our own movement, our Black and brown sisters and brothers who have taught us about how to be accountable as white people in this movement. But make no mistake, the steps that we have taken as a movement and the steps that we've taken individually have been baby steps. What we have in this moment today, it gives us who are white people in our movement a chance to demonstrate that we've learned a thing or two over the past 2 decades since we made that commitment to anti-racism. And the people of color within our movement and those outside of it, our colleagues, our coworkers, our friends, our family members. So many of us live in blended families now. They're calling us and they're watching to see how true to our word us white sisters and brothers are going to be. Whether we're going to join them now, whether we're going to listen, to show up, and to follow. And whether or not we're going to help make this the tipping point for real change in our nation, so that all of us can one day look back at this moment, at what started with George Floyd, but extended back into the depths of history, that we can look at that moment, this time, these protests, and say, yes, it was then that everything changed. Since I came back to Pax Christi USA a few months ago, even as we fought to stop going to war against Iran, to deal with and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and all the brokenness that the pandemic has highlighted in our society, from the lack of leadership in the White House to how little of our investment in arms and warfare did to protect us, to the underlying injustices of our economic and healthcare systems, and to the protest that we've already talked about today, I've still been thinking about the fact that Pax Christi USA is going to be 50 years old in 2022. To be honest, some folks have heard me talk about it so much that they're saying that I'm a little obsessed with it. Pax Christi USA has been a big part of my adult life. Joe Nangle, who I know many of you on this call know well, was really my first introduction, albeit indirectly, to Pax Christi USA. I started reading his column when I was given a Sojourner's magazine as a gift during my first year out of college, when I was doing a year of volunteer service, working with homeless people. I opened up the magazine and I started reading this Franciscan priest, Joe Nangle, heard him talking about Pax Christi, heard him talking about the peace of Christ, and I was hooked. It was that same year, during my year of volunteer service, that I went to my first Pax Christi Florida retreat. I was invited there by my supervisor, by a veteran of the peace movement. And I spent time at that first retreat in the best possible way, a way that I think many of you have probably spent time over the years, devouring the stories and the biblical insights of Dan Berrigan, who was the main speaker at the Pax Christi Florida retreat. In my 20s, I organized retreats and gatherings for students and young adults all over the nation under the Pax Christi USA umbrella. I led a local group in Florida, a campus chapter. I served on the Florida State Council, and I joined the national staff in 2001 And upon leaving the national staff, as Kurt mentioned, I joined and worked for Pax Christi International, living part-time in Washington and half the time in Brussels, and getting a sense for just how deep our movement is, not just in the United States, but around the world. So I think this 50th anniversary, our 50th birthday, the founding of Pax Christi USA, is a pretty big deal. And I'm hoping that as a movement, as we approach that 50th year, we look at it as a year of reflection for us, that we ask ourselves questions about what has been our legacy, what have been the victories and the challenges that we've encountered along the way. What have we learned from our promotion and practice of gospel nonviolence, from our engagement with the church and with each other and with the world? As we turn 50, we need to ask, what has been our story? But I also think that it's more than just talking about our legacy and remembering where it is that we came from. I think that turning 50 is also the chance for us to experience a moment of rebirth. In the biblical vernacular, it's the Jubilee year. It's when we get to take all that we've done and all that we've been and let it shape who we're going to be for the next 50 years. What Pax Christi USA is going to mean for the church and the world as we approach 100. Almost 50 years ago, a small group of mainly lay Catholics gathered together to form Pax Christi USA. You know some of the names: Eileen Egan and Gordon Zahn, Jerry Vanderhaar, Ed Guinan, Mary Evelyn Jagan, Bishop Tom Gumbleton, Joe Fahey, and so many others, more than I can name, veterans of the anti-war movement, the farm workers movement, and the civil rights movement, all locating and understanding their connection as being one, as a common identity within the Catholic Church. This small group would give birth to Pax Christi USA, and it would be Eileen's good friend, Dorothy Day, and other key Catholic peace activists who would contribute to that first conversation, what they called the Pax Christi affiliated discussion that birthed Pax Christi USA. And Dorothy would go on to become the first speaker at Pax Christi USA's first conference in 1973. Over the years, Pax Christi USA has had the flexibility to change and to adapt as the world has changed. We've embraced a variety of issues. We've shaped our identity to faithfully bring the message of the gospel to bear on what was happening in the world by reading the signs of the times. Pax Christi USA has been a movement, but it's also a community. For many of you, as it is for me, Pax Christi USA is my church. It's where I pray, study, and act. It's where I hear the word of God preached and shared. It's where I break bread with other disciples, sharing in and celebrating the Eucharist. Even after 30 years of being part of this movement, Pax Christi USA is still my Sunday school. It's still my religious education, where I am challenged to grow more deeply in Christ and to live out my commitment to Jesus and all of the values that he stood for and that he lived and embodied in his own incarnation, those values of compassion and nonviolence and so much more. I've heard this same sentiment expressed by our members all over the country. That is where our strength lies, that we are the church, that community of disciples that traces our lineage back to that first group of women and men who gathered around Jesus when he walked amongst us. This is also why I believe that our greatest strength is in our grassroots. It's in our network of local groups, religious communities, high school and campus chapters, parishes, regions, individual members who are all striving to witness to the peace of Christ in the world today, wherever they are and in whatever way that's being called forth from them in their local communities and in our national community. By training, my background is in biblical theology, so I refer to scripture a lot. And I like that biblical image of yeast and dough, that we have a responsibility to grow our grassroots network, to be the yeast in the dough of the church, the yeast in the dough of our society, to give birth to local Pax Christi communities so that we are like leaven in every parish, in every diocese, at every Catholic university and high school, and in cities and towns and every state in our nation. As we approach 50 years, how do we do this for the next 50 years? How do those of us who were part of the first and second generations who founded and shaped this movement pass that legacy on to the next generation of leaders? These are the conversations that I want us to be having together as we move toward 50 and as we commit to what the next 50 years are going to be like. I've only been serving as executive director for 8 months now. It feels like a lot longer. People have kindly asked me, I'm amazed at how many people have reached out, not just to me, but to our staff as well. And they've asked us how we're holding up, especially since the pandemic has started. But honestly, I feel like this is kind of par for the course for me as it relates to coming onto the Pax Christi USA staff. My first employment with Pax Christi USA was in 2001, and my start date was September 4th. I'll give you a moment to think about the significance of that. Dave Robinson, who was also starting at that time as our new executive director, had brought the program staff together in Erie to hatch a general plan for the coming year. That's what we do. We create a general plan that we use as a roadmap to kind of guide us through the year and help us to move our priorities forward. When I first came on staff back then in 2001, the staff had finished that general plan at around 9 o'clock on the night of September 10th. The next morning, I sat in the Erie office and I watched on the TV with the rest of the program staff as a plane flew into the World Trade Center. By the early afternoon, we had taken that plan and we had just torn it up. We recognized that the world had just changed in an instant and that our plan would need to change too. Our current staff also finished a plan. We finished that plan in December, right before Trump decided, as Bob pointed out when he talked about the drone strikes, to assassinate an Iranian general and try to pull us into a war with Iran. We had that general plan ratified by the National Council at their meeting at the end of January, and then a little over a month later, we had a pandemic that has radically altered the world for which we had prepared. So, like I said, I understand that this is what happens and we need to be flexible. While the bulk of our work over these recent months have been spent responding to and navigating the pandemic and everything that's connected with it, and then pivoting to also find our role in responding to the death of George Floyd and the movement that has risen up as a result of his death, we've been attending to elements of our work that we're convinced are going to strengthen our movement, are going to continue to build our community up, and sustain us for our overarching mission of witnessing to the peace of Christ and the nonviolence of the cross. There are elements of that work, even in a changing world, that never change and that we're committed to, and that we hold in our hands and we promise to continue to nourish and cultivate, even as we respond to the immediate situations that we find ourselves in. I want to give you a few just brief snapshots of what that work has been over the last few months. And I want to encourage you too, that if you're not checking out our website, to do it regularly. There's a lot of good information that we're sharing with people there, and it gives a good overview of what's going on in our movement, what's coming out of the national office, but what's happening with regions and local groups, and all of the individual members that are just doing extraordinary things at the grassroots level. I want to invite you to follow us on social media too. We've never been more active than we are right now on social media, and especially to join our email network, because that's where you're going to get the most vital information in the most succinct amount of time. So let me give you a few snapshots of some of what that work has been over the last few months. I want to start off with this. One of the things that I had heard over and over again from people as I came into this position was that we've got a small staff at the national office. It's no secret to me that our staff is small. We are currently 3 full-time people, and we have two full-time people. In a little bit over a month, we're going to be up to 5 full-time and 1 part-time person as we add a new national field organizer, a young woman that we were in the process of hiring right before the pandemic started, who will function as our primary program person with responsibilities for building up and working with our grassroots network, as well as doing some young adult organizing for us. We'll also be bringing on a new communications person in the next month. Rachel, who I'm sure many of you know, had made plans to transition into a different kind of work. Just as the pandemic was hitting, April was supposed to be her last day, but recognizing the tenuousness of the situation and stuff, we worked with Rachel to keep her on during this time, knowing that it would be difficult for her to find other work and whatnot. But once she does leave, and she's given us a final date of leaving at the beginning of July, we'll be also bringing a full-time communications person on to fill that work. Many of you already know and are familiar with Sister Diana Ortiz. She's our new deputy director, and she started the week that saw the World Health Organization announce that we were in a pandemic. Welcome, Diana. Now we're in a pandemic. Our other full-time person that some of y'all know is Nadia Espinoza. She's new to Pax Christi USA as of November, but she's our office manager, and in many ways, she serves as the first contact for so many people who are reaching out to learn about Pax Christi USA. If you haven't had a chance already to welcome both Diana and Nadia, I'd really encourage y'all to do so. The work situation that we're in has so many layers on it that make working difficult. And I can tell you that hearing from our members about the appreciation that you have for people like Diana and Nadia, it really goes a long way to boosting morale. And so I really encourage you to reach out if you haven't already. I think that having a real crackerjack national staff is of the utmost importance for serving the larger movement, and I think we're getting there, but we're still going to be a small staff. The work of Pax Christi USA, though, doesn't just happen at the national office. You know that firsthand here in DC with how active you are as a region and the great resources that you have in all of the people that have skills and expertise in so many ways and who make up the Pax Christi Metro DC and Baltimore region. Going forward, in order to speak to everything that Pax Christi USA's voice needs to speak to, we need to create better structures that invest more people in leadership. We need to model collaboration and shared leadership. We need people in a variety of positions speaking for all of us as a movement on the issues and the events that mean so much to us. I see the role of the national staff being to help identify those people in collaboration with our grassroots leadership and giving people within our movement the resources to represent us and to serve all of the movement, the greater movement. I really believe that people are our power. We don't have the money to influence change in this country. What we do have is people, and we need more people. We need to organize ourselves in a way that brings the full power of our people to bear so that we can make deep, meaningful changes in our communities and in the country. That's what I'm committed to. We're also strategizing for how to give young people in our movement the space that they need to be who they are, to address the issues that mean something to them, to have the resources they need to undertake their own projects, and to make decisions for themselves and the movement about who we are and what we stand for. This was my story as a young person who came to Pax Christi USA. I was mentored by elder members of this movement, including some of you that are on this call. So y'all are responsible for how I turned out. But I stayed with Pax Christi, first Pax Christi Florida, and then Pax Christi USA, because they gave me and my cohort the space to do our thing. They gave us the space to set our own agenda about what we wanted to address as young people and how we would do it as young people. And they lent us the resources we needed to figure it out, partially on our own, but with guidance when asked for. The folks, in my experience as a young person in Pax Christi USA, the people who were part of this movement and central to it, they extended the Pax Christi USA umbrella so that it would include me as a young person, so that it would give us young people, when I was that age, the space to learn how to be leaders, to make our own mistakes, to own our own decisions, and to invest our time and our energy and ourselves in projects of our own creation. Young people need that same space now. If we don't create that space in Pax Christi USA, they will not come into it. We need to make that space. And we do that by extending to young people our trust and our resources, by letting them experiment with doing things in ways that make sense to them and celebrate how they will change our movement, even if it becomes different than what we once knew it to be, or than what we once needed it to be. Eileen Egan's Pax Christi USA was not the Pax Christi USA of the late 80s. And the Pax Christi USA that existed prior to the end of the Cold War was very different than the one that existed after it, after the Berlin Wall fell. Change is the nature of things. There is great variation in being the peace of Christ in the world. There isn't just one way to do it. I also want to share with you, and I hope you've seen this coming from us at the national office, is that we're upping our communications game. And for those of you who know me well, I hope that doesn't come as a surprise, because communications work is what I've been doing for the last 20 years. We've been really intentional about taking full advantage of all the ways that we have to get people involved through communications. We're drawing from across the movement for articles on our website. We're asking for broad input on projects like the Pledge to Protect Others that we launched about a month ago. We're involving dozens of people in the creation of our statements instead of it being the voice of one or two. We're pooling resources from individuals and groups and regions and sharing them with others throughout our network. We added almost 900 new people to our email list through that effort with the Pledge to Protect Others. People who had never been engaged with Pax Christi USA and wanted to know more. Our social media has blown up over the last few months. Tens of thousands of new engagements every week. It's only June, and our website has already done 80% of the traffic that we did in 12 months last year. We've been quoted in Reuters and in the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, in addition to all the usual suspects in the Catholic media. The point is that we're getting the message out as fast and as far as we possibly can. And we're doing it with an eye to reaching new audiences, creating new relationships, and extending our sphere of influence while raising up a wide array of diverse voices from within our own community. Programmatically, I want to just give you a few quick hits on some of the things that we've been doing. Some of them are things that y'all have been asking for. We're diving deeper into the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, recognizing that nonviolence is at the center of our identity as a movement, and it's core to who we are. We were at the center of the effort to stop a war with Iran. We partnered with Win Without War and a handful of other organizations to pressure Congress not to give the Pentagon any more money from the upcoming stimulus packages. We built a Lenten campaign for prayer, study, and action that pivoted in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We've amplified the voices of Black Catholics in our movement and in the church in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and what we're seeing on the streets right now. And we've called on all of our movement, the white allies included, to be part of that. we've initiated a pledge to protect others in response to hearing our membership call for some concrete way that we could raise up our commitment to the common good, that we could practice solidarity, and that we could exercise leadership in the vacuum that has been left by the lack of leadership from the White House. And as I mentioned, we had over 2,000 people sign that pledge, and we reached an additional 15,000 people with a message that was rooted in Catholic social teaching. We've built on the Back from the Brink campaign that was started by Ronnie Fellerath Lowell, part of your region, and included lobbying actions aimed at prohibiting nuclear testing that Bob Moore had talked about and more. We helped organize the response to Trump's visit to the John Paul II Shrine, what was it, a week, 10 days ago now. We signed on as the official Catholic partner of Everytown for gun safety and Moms Demand Action, because what we're hearing from our young people is that we need to be more active on gun violence. And we're organizing to make gun violence an issue in the 2020 election. One of the things that I especially want to give a pitch to today is the Poor People's Campaign that is coming up on June 20th. We've signed on as a mobilizing organization, and I'm so grateful to the work that people like Gene Stokin and Scott Wright have done to help us be part of that circle. It's a great way for us to start connecting our local groups who want to build relationships with poor people's organizations in their area. Gene Stokin and I talked a few weeks ago with Ralph McLeod of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. And we realized that the natural connective tissue that should exist between CCHD funded groups and Pax Christi local groups and regions is there, and we need to make use of that. Many of these groups are involved in the Poor People's Campaign, and we think it's the beginning of a greater linkage between our movement and organizations led by workers, the homeless, immigrants, students, and other economically impoverished communities. So if you didn't see it yesterday, check out the email that went out. It's in the second part of that email of how you can get involved and how you can register to join the virtual march that is happening on June 20th. All right, I'm paying attention to time here, Kurt. I know I'm gonna get the bell at any second, but there's one last thing that I wanted to share too. And I really appreciate y'all letting me share as much as I have. I know I've talked a lot, but there's one last thing that I just wanted to mention. And I'm especially thankful because it's somebody on this call who emailed me last night and reminded me that I needed to make sure that I put this out there as well. I'm excited about what we're doing and what we can do together as Pax Christi USA. But to see this movement get to where it can be, we need people who have the means to invest financially in this work too. We can dream all that we want, but we've got to be able to fund those dreams. We need people who are willing to step up and be sustaining members, giving a small or a large amount, if you have that capacity, monthly, to help us have some predictability for our budget, especially in these difficult times. And the pandemic is a difficult time for nonprofits like Pax Christi USA. We need folks to remember Pax Christi USA in their will, to make sure that they pass on that legacy to seed new generations. I hope that some of you on this call will go to the website after it's over with, and that you'll give after we're done here today. My promise to you is that you're investing in a movement that is poised to be the same powerful, prophetic voice that it has been for the last 50 years, for the next 50 years. I think that now is the time for us to seed the field for this next incarnation of Pax Christi USA, to put a solid foundation under the next generation of Pax Christi USA leaders to be everything that we want this movement to be, everything it's been for us, and everything we want it to be for our families, for our children, for our grandchildren, and for those who follow us in this work. For those of you on the call who are already so generous with Pax Christi USA, I say thank you. You have my deep, deep thanks. So that's all I've got for right now, folks. I know that we've got some questions that have popped up in the chat, and I'm happy to answer those and to hear some of your comments. Thanks really for indulging me. I know that was quite long.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Actually, you sort of hit exactly the time, so
great.
That's really good. Let me read off some of the questions from, I just lost my place. I'm sorry about that. From Candy Warner, she asked about your, where was that? Well, it was about Pax Christi USA and the position about defunding the police. What your view of that? Is you going to deal with it at all, or talk about this in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually had a couple things that we've put up on the website. One of our members, Beatrice Parwadikar. Beatrice is a woman of color who has been really active in a number of groups, and she asked if she could write an article on defunding the police and attaching it to our own history of defunding the military and what that means. My own understanding of the defunding the police movement and my own appreciation for the people that are helping to articulate it is that it's something that Pax Christi USA should be supportive of. That what we've been talking about in terms of the military is the same thing that people that are talking about defunding the police are talking about. They're talking about taking those funds that we have sunk into police forces in the name of increasing security, of putting up cameras, of buying armor and military grade equipment, of putting more boots on the ground on our streets, of punishing more criminals, taking all that money that's being put into that and starting to redirect it into things that are actually getting at the root causes of criminal behavior and the root causes that cause people to do crime. So we want to take that money. We've been defunding, as somebody put it to me earlier, defunding the police only sounds strange until you realize that we've been defunding education in this country for generations now. So defunding the police means putting more money into things like education and healthcare and jobs training and nonviolent resources that defuse situations. We've asked our police to do a lot of different things, and our communities of color have told us that some of those things that the police have been empowered to do are things that have hurt them and killed the people they love. So as we look at what it means to defund the police, I think that's a conversation that Pax Christi USA members should be really interested in and really open to. And despite whatever hesitancy hearing that language might do for us, I ask that we sit back and we listen to it and we let it marinate. And we try to think of it also in terms of that lens that we've been using for a long time when we've been calling for the defunding of the military budget in this country.
Thank you very much. Now, another question was, what is PSC USA planning in connection with the 2020 election?
Great question. We've been part of a few different things. You know, I came on back in October, and there were a few things that were already at work within a group that Pax Christi USA is part of, the DC Catholic Coalition. One of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to duplicate the work that's already out there. So we look at people like Mary Knoll, Dan Moriarty, who is part of your regional council, who just did a great webinar on nuclear disarmament, and they've put out a great resource for us to engage the election around the issue of nuclear disarmament. But there are other issues too that speak to the values of Pax Christi USA. And I mentioned one of those in the presentation that I just gave. One of the things that we're hearing, for instance, from our young members is how important gun violence is to people that are in their teens and in their 20s. And that gun violence needs to be part of the conversation that happens in the 2020 election. And that's why we signed on when we were approached by Moms Demand Action and Everytown for Gun Safety to be the Catholic partner in that circle and to help educate voters around gun violence. As we get closer to the 2020 election, and as we definitely want to influence how it is that people are looking at the various issues that are important to us. And those issues run the gamut from nuclear disarmament to gun violence to climate change to race, and to making sure that racism is central to the conversation that's taking place. I look forward to us putting out statements and resources for prayer, study, and action that will be directed at the 2020 election. I was part of the team in 2004 that helped to cultivate the Life Does Not End at Birth campaign that Pax Christi USA was the major motivator for in 2004, and have served Pax Christi USA on 2 other elections in 2008 and 2012. So I think it's about creating a certain set of resources that don't duplicate what's already out there, and working in tandem with other groups within the DC Catholic Coalition, the religious communities, folks like the Franciscan Action Network to put out good Catholic resources, because we know that it's Catholics that helped to set us on a path in terms of the policies that we're seeing enacted in this administration right now. And we need to reach Catholics in the pew, reach Catholics that are on the fence, reach Catholics that are trying to figure out how to live out their faithful call to Jesus and the gospel call to nonviolence in the world today. And we need to share with them the values of Pax Christi USA and how they're called to use those values as a lens as they make decisions about how to vote and participate in the 2020 elections.
How might PCUSA and regional Pax Christi councils spread the word about considering a broader, consistent ethic of life when forming a conscience that informs how to vote in November?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was part of, I mentioned, some of you I think are familiar with the Life Does Not End at Birth campaign that we did in 2004, which tried to situate the spectrum of issues that are important to a person that identifies as Catholic. We've had a Pope that has located issues that are central to our Catholic identity as being important, whether it's been climate change or whether the climate crisis or racism. And so I think that, Pax Christi Metro DC, I think, has been one of the regions that has kind of led on looking at things from a consistent ethic of life perspective. So I think that within our regions, there's already the expertise and the skills and the lens for being able to look at those issues from that perspective. And again, what I hope that we can do is lift up some of the resources that are already out there that regions have put into practice and used in past elections, as well as within their own circles, that we can help to elevate and amplify those so that other Catholics that are wanting to approach this election from the consistent ethic of life viewpoint will have the resources to be able to do that.
Another question is, how can the, sort of, I think, connect to this, how can the regional councils and Pax Christi USA work better together on common issues, such as the election, such as I would think the consistent ethic of life and racism. What would you suggest?
Yeah, that's a great, Kurt. That's a great question, Kurt. Great question for whoever asked it.
Yeah, I'm just repeating. I'm only the messenger. I don't.
Sure.
I don't want to take ownership for something for good ideas that aren't mine. Go ahead.
Okay. As I mentioned, as I was sharing a little bit about my own history with y'all, is that I came to Pax Christi USA through local group work and then through regional work. I was part of Pax Christi Florida for a long time, and I served on the state council when I was in Florida. To me, one of the things that Pax Christi USA, frankly, I think we need to do better is that we need to be more intentional about what our structures are and what our roles and responsibilities are at every level of the movement to one another. I come from a community organizing background, and if we want to have a movement that can be mobilized to bring the fullness of our power for change to the issues that we care about, then we need to be more intentional about how we do that work, and we need to be better organized. There is a great degree of expertise that is located in people at the regional level, and you guys know this firsthand in Washington, D.C. because of the richness of the people in your region, but it's true of every region in Pax Christi USA. And we need to make sure that we're creating the kind of pathways to leadership that allow the voices of people with expertise and skills to be able to address the issues that all of us care about. To me, I want to see, Pax Christi USA is not a Washington, I know you guys are the Washington, D.C. region, but we are not a Washington-centric movement. We are a grassroots movement that is located in dioceses and parishes and states all across the nation. And the strength of our perspective comes from the fact that we have people at every level all throughout the nation who feed into the conversation that we have as a national movement. To me, strengthening those structures from a community organizing perspective and putting in place a plan that creates the structures that best work for us in terms of mobilizing our movement and exercising our power is really, really important for me at our grassroots level. I think one of the things that I want to do, I mentioned that there's a general plan that gets created for the movement, and it's been traditionally the role of the national staff in collaboration with a few individuals to put that general plan together. What I've been putting in place is a system where we're getting feedback and input from every level of the organization leading into the creation of that general plan. The years that I've been part of Pax Christi USA, regional gatherings were really important. And what I mean by that is not regional gatherings like we're doing now, but bringing all of the regional leaders together so that we can have conversations about common projects, common values, and how we can collaborate better. We have the technology to be able to do that. We're doing it now, right here in the middle of a pandemic. I think that there's no reason that we don't start to model a more deeply horizontal leadership structure within Pax Christi USA and bring out the investment and the gifts of so many people in our movement so that we can amplify them and give them a national audience. I don't know if that doesn't get at some of the specifics, but it's really, honestly, I'm a structure person. I'm a community organizer by heart. And it's really important to me that we look at what our structures are and we ask how we can be intentional about those structures to make us a stronger, more unified movement at every level.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about this example right here. And actually, I'm not sure if others have this experience, that I find that even though I'm physically distant from a lot of people, that I've actually had more of the video interactions with family members and friends over the past few months than I typically do. So in some ways, we were physically distant, but actually less socially distant.
And Kurt, can I say one more thing there, Kurt?
Yeah.
Like one of the reasons I'm so glad to be with you guys is that I had scheduled so many meetings. To me, it was so important for me to be out on the road. When I interviewed for the job of executive director, one of the things that I really stressed to the committee that was interviewing me was my belief that the executive director for this movement and people in the national office, that we needed to be out on the road, engaging people where they live, getting to know the grassroots, making sure that the work that we're doing is informed by the experience of the people that are, it's that good Catholic principle of subsidiarity, right? That the things that are impacting people at the places that they live, that we need to be aware of that. And that needs to be part of the conversation that we're happening, that it doesn't end up being a conversation among a small group of people. That's also being true to our anti-racist identity, is that often what gets created in organizations like Pax Christi USA is a sort of, informal network of people who all know each other. And it's hard for people that are not part of that circle to break in and have their voices heard. And what I had really hoped to do during these months that we've been quarantined and under stay-at-home orders is to be out and among folks, to hearing the stories. And I've been doing that virtually in lieu of being able to actually sit down with folks. I've been doing it over the phone. And I really want people to know and to feel that every voice in this movement matters. It's the people who make up Pax Christi USA, and it's the people where we get our power. And we need to be able to tap into all of that and make people feel that when they speak, they don't speak in just their voice, but they speak with the full authority of the whole movement of Pax Christi USA behind them. That's really my hope.
This is a comment from Art Mulholland, though this actually is also close to my own heart because I've seen it with my own children. He heard a Black priest said at an annual meeting that we can't attract young people unless we make it clear we don't agree with anti-gay sentiments of the mainstream church. I hear that so strongly from my own children, and that's one of their. So, what are your comments on that?
Yeah, I think we need to be unequivocal about the dignity of every human being, no matter what their gender or sexual orientation is. Pax Christi USA, there is no place for any kind of bigotry within Pax Christi USA, especially to our brothers and sisters that identify as part of the LGBTQ community. That fundamentally, Pax Christi USA, I think, again, for somebody like myself as a young Catholic that found themselves, sort of on the edges of the Catholic Church at different times, that I was looking for a place to stay and to be part of this church. And Pax Christi USA afforded that to me because it was the place where we recognized the full dignity of every human being, the full, that dignity comes from the virtue of being created as a child of God and having inherent dignity and worth, no matter, that cannot be judged or condemned by any other person. And it was a place where I could live out my discipleship to Jesus and to the nonviolent Christ in a really concrete way. So absolutely 100% that if we're going to be relevant and authentic with young people, we need to image the kingdom of God, the reign of God that Jesus talked about, which was a reign that was much more inclusive than we often hear from some segments of the institutional church. And I think almost everybody on this call will say amen to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen. See some hands up. Getting Bishop John Stowe as the first bishop president of Pax Christi USA in many years has been a terrific blessing. Can you talk about what Bishop Stowe has brought to PC USA and how you work with him?
Yeah, Bishop Stowe, I think y'all know he's a Franciscan and he got the Joe Nangle imprimatur, so that was good. But I don't know Bishop Stowe very well. I've met him a handful of times and we've had some conversations and we're getting to know one another. I remember when Bishop Stowe was named a bishop because I was the communications director at Pax Christi USA. And one of the things that came across my desk was the press release announcing him as bishop talked about how he was formed by his experience of being part of a Pax Christi group when he was a young person. And I thought, this is great. We've got a bishop, a person who's just been named a bishop who came up through Pax Christi USA. I think Bishop Stowe is a terrific leader for Pax Christi USA. I think he knows and he gets gospel nonviolence from his experience as a Franciscan. More than that, I think that he recognizes that the church is called to be, that he resonates with the examples of those bishop presidents that have gone before him in Pax Christi USA, that he appreciates and has learned from the witness of people like Tom Gumbleton and like Walter Sullivan and like Gabino Zavala and Carol Dozier and those other bishops that were part of Pax Christi USA. And he's committed to helping us make inroads with the institutional church. We have talked about how there are bishops out there who are favorable to some of the work that Pax Christi USA does and how important it is for us as a movement to affirm segments of the institutional church, especially bishops, priests, women religious, and others, universities, Catholic institutions, parishes, when they stand up and they stand for the values that are central to who we are as Pax Christi USA. I think one of those ways that we've been doing that, and you see, is what's happened with Archbishop Gregory there in Washington, D.C., that he took such a strong stance about the Knights of Columbus inviting Donald Trump to come and make an appearance at the John Paul II Shrine. And because of that stance, he is getting slammed by conservative Catholics, by organizations like the Church Militant. And it's been Pax Christi USA members that have been out there publicly on the Facebook and social media pages of the Archdiocese of Washington, thanking him for taking that stance. It doesn't mean we agree with everything that comes out of any particular bishop or priest or parish or the institutional church, but it means that when they're speaking the language of the Jesus who is nonviolent, the Jesus who is who embodies the peace of Christ that we all follow, that we're going to affirm that, and we're going to make them build relationships so that we have the kind of influence that we need to have and that we have to have within the structures of the Catholic Church, be they parishes or universities or dioceses. It's really important to me that we think strategically in that way, that our audiences are in the parishes and the dioceses of this nation, and that we have to have relationships with them. And where is it that we have points of contact that we can build relationships and make inroads? Bishop Stowe, that was the original question, and I segued to other stuff. But yeah, I think Bishop Stowe is terrific. He's been out there for us on so many issues. He's right with us on everything that we talk about, whether it's nuclear disarmament, climate change, or war. He's accessible. He's wanting to put his name on things. He is going to be one of the featured people at the virtual march. He's contributed a part for the litany that's happening with the Poor People's Campaign virtual march on June 20th. He's put out media statements when we've asked him to. Yeah, I think Bishop Stowe is terrific, and I think it's really important for us to have that connection to the institutional church. And I think John Stowe is the exact person, the right person for the right time for Pax Christi USA.
Okay, thank you very much, Johnny, for that, for all you've said, the inspiration, and how we, yeah, okay. A round of applause for what you've done. And now moving on to our last section, and I think I'll hand it off to Bob Cook.
Okay, thank you again, Johnny. We thank you for your words, your wisdom, your work ethic. It was all those were very clear to us today, and to many of us for up to 30 years that some of us have known you. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate everybody sitting through an hour, 40 minutes of a online presentation. So just hang in there for another 20 minutes, and hopefully we'll end this before noon. So we won't take up any of your afternoon. So one of the things I just want to mention quickly to start out my remarks is we all know that the people who are baptized Roman Catholic make up the largest denomination, faith denomination in the country. So somewhere 60 to 65 million people in the United States. If we could just get 10% of those to be really active in peace and justice movements, we would have a force that's unstoppable. So I'm really glad that Johnny is going to, and all of us are going to work together and to go into the next 50 years and start going to goals like that to get everybody more involved. Also, I just want to touch base a little bit on the LGBTQ question. I just want to point out that the chairperson of the Pax Christi National Council is a young Catholic who used to be the head of the Pax Christi group at Catholic University of America and part of our region. And Bob Shine has worked with New Ways Ministries for the last 4 or 5 or more years. So again, this is something that's very strong with Bob, and we'll continue to see that. So I think now more than any time that I can remember in my recent memory, people of good faith need to come together and work for a better world, work to bring forth the beloved community. We need to make sure that many of our Catholic brothers and sisters who may have been awakened by the senseless killings of more African Americans in recent months do not fall back into our old selves, but rather continue to grow and work for justice in the tradition of Catholic social teaching and the gospel message, which Catholic social teaching is based on. All of us here can be, salt for that work. So right now, what I want to do is quickly point out just a few of the things that people, Pax Christi members in our region are doing. And this is just a few things, and I apologize to everybody because I'm leaving out dozens and dozens of great things that we and our allies are doing right now. So I'm just going to go through these very quickly. Some of the people who are mentioned here, who are not mentioned here, may want to use the chat to tell us about some other things that are going on. So the first thing I have is I want to recognize Little Friends for Peace. And most of us know MJ and Jerry Park. They're 2008 Pax Christi USA Teachers of Peace. And for the last 35 years or so, they have been teaching peace to our young people and to others. And right now, during the pandemic situation, they're offering a lot of online peace circles. So if you know of anybody who has been shaken by the pandemic or what's been going on in other ways in recent months, have them get in touch with them. Little MJ is also one of our active members on the Ribbon event that's been mentioned by Bob Moore. Some of you took place in the Ribbon event. The Ribbon event took place originally in the early 1980s during the great anti-nuclear weapon movement during that time. And ribbons saying that we were against nuclear weapons were made and 35 miles long. So they stretched around the Pentagon and around the Capitol and the White House. So something similar is being worked on right now. Sister Diana Ortiz is heading that up for Pax Christi USA. Ronnie Lowell, Mary Leopold, MJ Park, and Kurt are some of the people working on that. So pay attention to that. One of our former Pax Christi Metro DC Baltimore council members is Eli McCarthy. Eli has been doing a lot of work on Catholic nonviolence work, and he just came out with his second book, A Just Peace Ethic Primer. So you may want to look for that book. We'll send out some information after the Zoom meeting on that. And Eli is also one of the founders of the DC Peace Team. So he's sorry he can't be here with us because they already had set up some unarmed civilian protection and accompaniment training today. So that's where Eli is right now. The Washington Interfaith Network, WIN, a lot of the people in DC know who they are. And they're bringing forth some really sweeping proposals for the DC Council that they would like as many individuals and organizations to support. So Angela Wilcox Turnbull, who's on the call, and she's with St. Augustine Social Concerns Group, wants to reach out to as many of our local organizations to really back that movement. So we'll put you in touch with Angela. One of the things that we've been working on for the last 4 or 5 years, mainly with the 3 Pax Christi groups in Montgomery County, has been helping refugees, asylees, and asylum seekers. So the St. Rosa Lima and St. Francis Pax Christi group are now involved in reforming that group to do more work in both Montgomery and Prince George's County, and we're going to start working also with undocumented folks. Until now, we mainly work with refugees and asylees and asylum seekers. So more on that also. One long time, both local and national leader in the peace movement is on the call today. And it's Pat Elder. Many of you know Pat. Pat was probably the main leader of the counter recruitment effort that's been going on the last 15 to 20 years around the country and locally. One of the main things Pat is working on right now is PFAS containment. And PFAS is one of the most deadly chemicals around. It stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl all kill substances. So they use this to put out fires caused by jet fuel. And that's the only thing that'll put it out. So if it could put that out, what does it do with us? So a lot of people on or near military bases are being affected by that. So reach out to Pat on that. Johnny also talked about the DC Catholic Coalition, which is a great organization of about 10 different Catholic peace and justice organizations that are headquartered here. Most of them are headquartered here in DC. They are also starting a new campaign on racism. A lot of you remember from last year, they did a really good nationwide campaign on children separated from their families at the border, which was very good and really called a lot of attention to that. And we have people from, so Pax Christi USA is part of that, Franciscan Action Network, who we have a couple of people on the call from, Marino Office of Global Concerns, Sisters of Mercy Institute Office, Columbian Center of Advocacy and Outreach are just some of those organizations. And as Johnny also mentioned, there'll be more stuff coming out from them regarding the election. So one of the things too, we do try to both support church leadership when it's due, and we also try to challenge church leadership. So as we were talking about this past week, we sent letters. The Pax Christi Metro DC Baltimore Council sent letters out to the heads of the 3 dioceses that are in our region, thanking them for what they've done so far on racial equality and encouraging them to do a lot more, and to do it in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. And working against the giant triplets of evil that he talked about: racism, materialism, and militarism. And of course, extreme materialism leading to the poverty for many people. And at the same time, unbeknownst to myself anyway, some of our friends up in Baltimore have been planning to challenge Archbishop Laurie to have the Archdiocese stop investing in weapons. So Janice Survey Duzinska, and I always kill her name, she's on the call right now. And on the weekend of June 19th to 21st is going to be both a fast and witness at the Basilica up in Baltimore, calling for this divestment. And they're also going to do it on the weekend of July 4th. So we'll get in touch with you. So my last comment before handing this over to Mary Leopold is that I want to, when you get off the call sometime today, after you have a little rest, you may want to go to the National Catholic Reporter. There's a good article that came out in the National Catholic Reporter by the Pax Christi Metro DC Baltimore Peacemaker of the Year, Judith Kelly. And it's titled Corpus Christi Film. Each of us is a priest of God. So please take a look at it when you can. Now I'd like to hand this over to Mary Leopold, who will speak to us regarding our piece of the peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, everybody. It just lifts my heart to see all your good faces here. It's been a long break from human contact, or from enough extensive enough human contact, and a little Zoom fatigue, but this isn't fatiguing at all. I'm just lifted. I'm overjoyed. What I want to tell you is where you come in, each of you, each of us, not just in regard to all the specific, each one of them enormous and overwhelming issues that you've been hearing about, but to our home organization, Pax Christi, at all of its levels. We really welcome everyone on the call, everyone in the church, of course, to join us, to support us, to help us support you in your work for peace with justice for all. So if you're already on the mailing list and you got this message, you're connected. I just ask you, keep opening our messages and passing them on, sharing them with people in your many circles of influence. Second, if you don't already belong to a parish group, to the smallest and perhaps most important level of Pax Christi, find one or found one. Our website has contact information on the groups that exist around the region, and all of us, including specifically Bob Cook, who is co-chair and dynamo of Boundless Energy, can help you organize a group. There'll be some contact information later, but if you know one of us, reach out. We want you to be plugged in because we need that power. We need that energy. We invite you to take part in our regional activities virtually for the time being, eventually, please God, in person. And the next big one coming up, we have 2 a year, this spring assembly, and in the fall, our Peacemakers of the Year Awards Assembly. So we'll be inviting nominations soon, would accept them informally immediately for the people we want to recognize at that time. Keep visiting our website on this page, our Facebook page that is also. And if you're not on our mailing list already, as I just mentioned, please join it now by emailing Kurt at charityweb.net. That's on the page. And again, you, whoever you are at the center of a great many networks. So let your light shine, be the yeast, and invite friends, family, co-workers to connect to Pax Christi as well. We want it to be not something on the fringes of Mother Church, but something at her heart, as it was born to be, as peace was born to be. We have an open regional council meeting on the first Saturday of every month from 9:30 to noon. Right now, we're doing them online. We'll be doing one in the fall, God willing, at the Parks Peace Oasis. In September, locations vary a little bit, but there's a shorter list of people who get invitations to that, get the agenda in advance, and we welcome every one of you to join those calls at any time. And we especially welcome, even though a lot of us are a little gray, within our circles are young people, people of color, other women. We're a little low on women, which is interesting because I remember decades ago when I'd take my kids to peace events and they didn't want to come back because it was all women. So praise God for the men. And it's a big, beautiful tent. Invite everybody in. Also, we have spaces on the council. So come to our meetings, hang out for a while, get comfortable, and then maybe take a seat on the regional council. Finally, Johnny said this, I want to reiterate it. I like to say peace is priceless, but it isn't free. I have to say I have only been supporting Pax Christi at all three of its levels for the last couple of years, but there's no earthly reason not to. We should all be engaged at the local level, the regional level, the national level, and the international level with Pax Christi and the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, which was an offshoot of Pax Christi International and some other groups, and which produced that invitation challenge to the church to incorporate, to prioritize gospel nonviolence, which I've described as the most exciting thing that has happened in my life, except for the births of my children, and adoptions, respectively, of my children. It's just a fabulous, fabulous organization. Again, you see contact numbers and websites here. You'll see them again at the end. We want to close with prayers, so I'll stop for now. Thank you all. Bless you all.
Okay, friends, we're going to put up our closing prayer in a second. So when it's up, I'm going to read it, and please read it wherever you are to yourselves. Join me as I pray it. Now, this prayer is a prayer for dismantling racism. It was written by the Pax Christi anti-racism team, PCART, in 2012. And unfortunately, it is as relevant today as it was then and years before then. So please join me in reading the closing prayer. Dear God, in our efforts to dismantle racism, we understand that we struggle not merely against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. Those institutions and systems that keep racism alive by perpetuating the lie that some members of the family are inferior and some are superior. Create in us a new mind and heart that will enable us to see brothers and sisters in the faces of those divided by racial categories. Give us the grace and strength to rid ourselves of racial stereotypes that oppress some of us while providing entitlements to others. Help us to create a church and nation that embraces the hopes and fears of oppressed people of color where we live, as well as all around the world. Heal your family, God, and make us one with you, in union with our brother Jesus, and empowered by your Holy Spirit. Amen. So once again, I want to thank everyone for spending a good part of their morning with us today. So we ask that you go in peace and continue your great work for justice, and if possible, expand it. And please join Pax Christi Metro DC Baltimore in whatever ways you can. So now as we leave, Bob will put up just a flyer, hopefully with some contact information on it. So if you need some contact information, you can get it from that flyer. But thank you, everybody. Peace be with you. Thank you.